this guide, we'll be going over 6 tips that can really improve your general performance as a mage in Final Fantasy XIV. Naturally, these tips will be generally helpful for all mages, some even for healers, and so may include job-specific examples but will be applicable to all or most mages. Let's start with the first tip on how to deal with pulls in a dungeon. As a mage, you may find it incredibly difficult to keep up with your team while the tank pulls, given how a large amount of your attacks have cast times. Now, each mage is very unique in this particular aspect, so let me give you some job-specific suggestions to keep up with your team. The universally viable option, of course, is to use Swift Cast and cast one spell as you run along your team and simply make sure to be ready when we come to a halt. In this case, for Black Mage specifically, hard casting High Blizzard 2 and then sharp casting and swift casting Thunder 4 may be helpful. Then you can cast Thundercloud procs if you get any, or you can cast Umbral Soul if not. This way, you will be ready to jump straight into High Fire and Flare, and running in Umbral Ice also means your Polyglot timer is ticking. For Red Mage and Summoner, you can simply hardcast your area of effect, AoE for short, of choice and then swift cast it again as you run. If, on the other hand, you want to do as much damage as you possibly can while running, there are other options. Let's start with Summoner. I would recommend simply casting Try Disaster as best you can. Try to slidecast it, I will get to this later, as saving Bahamut for when all the mobs are clumped together is simply too useful to use early. However, after the initial pull in a dungeon, you may find it helpful to plan the AoE pulls such that you can do a certain order of primals as you go. Using Ifrit's Astral Flow Crimson Cyclone can be extremely helpful for catching up, but you would rather not use the Ruby Catastrophes. Additionally, saving Garuda for last so you can have Slipstream placed where the enemies end up is also a great idea. This of course implies Titan is excellent for the running part of a pull. If you can, save your Bahamut and Phoenix for when the mobs are clumped up. Red Mage next. While Swift Cast and 2 Acceleration gives you a few casts while running, you can also get enough of a lead ahead of your tank to hard cast some spells by combining Core Record with Displacement. Dash up to the enemy, run past them and then use Displacement to shoot yourself further ahead of them. I recommend trying to stockpile mana for a melee combo when the mobs are clumped up, rather than using it while running simply because you can. Black Mage will have to choose between using triple casts when the mobs are clumped up or while running. Whenever you use it, you would prefer to have as many flares triple casted as possible, utilizing both Mana Font and Ethers. If you would rather save triple cast though, I have one suggestion. As previously mentioned, hardcast High Blizzard 2, try to get out of sharp casted Thunder 4. If possible, cast Freeze so you can get Umbral Hearts. After that, alternate between High Fire 2 and High Blizzard 2. Whenever you switch into Umbral Ice, you can use Paradox as an instant cast as well, although it being single target makes it a bit weaker, but it is still something. Why alternate between Fire and Ice? When you alternate, the cast times are much shorter and makes it much more feasible to keep up with your team. You don't have to fit the freeze in, as you will probably have to use Umbral Soul sometimes anyway. If you get Polyglots, this is also a great time to use Foul to keep running, although saving that for when the enemies are clumped up may also be preferable. With that long talk about how to keep up the damage while running, this leads us to the concern of getting aggro as a DPS. As a mage, it may be scary to get aggro from enemies in a dungeon, but it does not mean your immediate death to do so. Both Black Mage and Summoner have shields they can apply when expecting damage, which I do recommend. Red Mage will instead have to make use of their displacement mobility to stay ahead, so the tank has a chance to pick the mobs off you quicker. However, ultimately it is your choice whether you want to maximize damage and ignore aggro concerns, or you would rather play it safe and stay under the tank in enmity. To track your enmity on enemies quickly, keep an eye on the gems in the enemy list. Green means that you are safe, but as the gem gradually turns red, yellow, then orange, then red, you are closer to danger. Yellow means you have over 50% of the enmity of whoever has the most, hopefully the tank. Orange means you are very close to getting aggro and that you should probably stop. Red of course means that you are the target. If you do end up in the unfortunate scenario of getting aggro, your aim should be to make your way to the tank to make it as easy for them as possible to get back the aggro of the enemies you pulled off of them. A bonus tip on this aspect is that when casting instant spells, you may find it helpful to use the mobility you get to run past the tank and closer to the next packs so you have a head start. The second tip is about positioning as a mage. Since most of your attacks as a mage are ranged, you may feel inclined to hang out far away from the boss because it feels safer. Now, the average boss is just as likely to have attacks targeting the outer rings of the arena as the inner rings, so staying far away is not necessarily even remotely safer than being close. In fact, being closer to your team comes with far more benefits than being far away from the boss. Being closer to your healer means they can more easily heal you, and being closer to any party member that has access to a raid buff means you will be able to benefit from these more reliably. At the same time, it is not unusual for bosses to have attacks that target in a cone shape, meaning it is easier to avoid if you are closer, or attacks that hit a specific half of the room, again, meaning that being closer to the center makes it easier to dodge. This is all to say that the safest place to be tends to be closer to the center, or at least closer to the boss. In other words, if you have no good reason to be far away, come closer. For Red Mage and Summoner especially, being in the center of the room or even under the boss is optimal when casting your buffs, as it maximizes the chance everyone else gets them. This also circles back to you, because knowing that buffs are most effectively cast from under the boss means that if you are very far away from the boss, you know you will not benefit. The third tip is about slidecasting, a crucial mechanic to master for mages especially, although particularly crucial for black mages. During the last half second of any cast, you can move. This means that mastering this allows even a black mage to move around a little bit all the time. Now, an important aspect about slidecasting as a mage is knowing when you can make it to your destination in time while slidecasting, and when you need to pull up your pants and run for your life. Learning a boss fight from the perspective of a mage is a lot about learning these timings. How long is there till the next mechanic? Where do you need to be for that? Do you need to plan instant cast spells for this, or can you slowly slidecast your way there gradually? If you want to know a little bit more about how to slidecast, I have a short on this subject specifically. Anyway, this tip perfectly leads into the fourth tip about planning your rotation. You could say it is about enemy awareness. Mages all have a unique feature in common in that they have the ability to adjust their rotations significantly to the encounter. Red Mage can choose to plan their melee combos for high mobility sections in a fight, or save them for a big burst moment. Summoners can plan to use Ifrit when there is a slow section. Black Mage is the most complicated, but it has so many sequences and pathways to optimize its rotation for a specific situation that there exist openers that are several minutes long, that take into consideration every single boss mechanic and how to deal with it as you go. While it is totally possible for a mage to sort of autopilot, being aware of your enemy and using your tools accordingly makes it easier to deal with bosses. For example, delaying your Red Mage melee combo because you know there is something coming up shortly where you would prefer to use it. Or using Ifrit during your raid cooldowns because you know if you don't, then when you have to use Ifrit, you cannot stand still. Simply put, not casting for a single GCD may very well be more detrimental to your performance than casting the strongest spells during your raid cooldowns is beneficial. All mages also have varying capacities of defensive tools, with Black Mage and Summoner having shields, and Red Mage having a defensive raid cooldown in Magic Barrier, not to mention heals and raises for when you need it. All three also have Aggro, so being aware of what your target is doing can be very helpful. When the boss is casting a raid-wide attack or even a tank buster, consider using your defensive tools accordingly to help the rest of your team. The fifth tip is about party awareness and timing your burst every 2 minutes. If you are a Savage Raider, this is probably completely obvious and you always do this by planning with your static or even with randoms due to how set in stone optimized rotations can be. However, if you're doing non-Savage content, it is not unusual for people to die mid-fight, getting their cooldowns offset from the 2-minute timer. Some players also simply don't care or do their own thing, which also offsets the timer. While all three mages have their own 2-minute buffs of some sort, Red Mage with Manification and Embolden, Summoner with Searing Light, and Black Mage with Ley Lines. Being aware of when others use raid cooldowns can still be helpful. For example, Red Mages can choose to plan their extra melee combos outside of their own cooldowns for when others use cooldowns. Being aware of your own 2-minute timer lets you know to skip over primals when necessary to jump to Bahamut or Phoenix as a summoner. For Black Mage, when benefiting from raid cooldowns is a great time to use Xenoglossy for a bigger burst. In other words, while all 3 mages have their own internal 2-minute timers to play around, being aware of the raid buffs in your current party and how the players choose to utilize them can be helpful to gain some extra damage throughout the fight. The 6th and final tip is about the limit break. Now, just to be sure, let me explain what it is first. The limit break is a gauge that becomes available in group content, and it is a shared gauge, meaning that if any one person uses it, the entire party loses it. As such, it is important for the entire party to use it correctly. In a 4-player party, you have access to Limit Break 1 and unlock Limit Break 2 on the final boss of a dungeon. In 8 or more player content, you get access to Limit Break 3. Depending on what role you are, the Limit Break does something different. Tanks apply a raid-wide damage reduction effect, and the higher Limit Break stage, the greater it is. In most situations, the tank Limit Break is only needed for attacks that will wipe the raid specifically if you don't use the tank Limit Break, so you typically know when this happens. The healer Limit Break heals the entire raid for a gradually increasing amount, with Limit Break 3 fully healing everyone, maxing out their MP, and also raising everyone from the dead without applying the weakness debuff normally applied by raising spells. Melee DPS Limit Break is an increasingly powerful single target attack, meaning that in most boss fights it is expected that they use the Limit Break. However, with 2 or more targets, the ranged physical, and more importantly for you, the mage limit break becomes superior. The ranged physical limit break is an increasingly powerful line AoE, and the mage limit break is an increasingly powerful point-and-click placed circle AoE. A significant difference is that the ranged physical limit break does about 10% less damage than the mage limit break. However, casting the limit break when it should is more significant for these kinds of AoE bursts than making sure the correct person uses it. These AoE limit breaks specifically only do more damage than the melee limit break on 2 or more targets. In a dungeon context, it is considered more time efficient to use an AoE limit break on the final pack before the final boss of a dungeon, in comparison to trying to get a limit break 2 on the final boss, who often will be dead or near dead by that point anyway. For raid bosses on the other hand, unless the fight has more than one target, the AoE limit breaks are usually only used in the event that the melee DPS simply don't bother using theirs. An additional thing to keep in mind about the limit break in these cases is that you don't have to make use of a limit break the moment it is available, especially with Limit Break 3. While a melee Limit Break 3 does tremendous amounts of damage, in a bad spot a healer's limit break can save a losing battle. But if you use the limit break, then you lose this possibility. For this reason, it is worth it to wait with using a Limit Break 3 until you know that it is safe to do so, that you know the healers will not need it. As such, if your party has shown to be likely to die randomly or have issues with a specific mechanic, then choosing to wait with using the limit break, yes, even as a mage, until after that happens to make sure it is safe to use it is what makes the difference between a great and an exceptional player. The latest you should wait with using an attack limit break should not be much later than when the boss is below 10% HP. If you wait much longer than this, then you may end up wasting some of the limit break damage, and the cast time is simply too long to waste it to use as a glorified execution move. But do try to make sure the melee DPS gets plenty of opportunity to use it first, as their limit break is stronger for single target fights. Thank you for watching. I hope you find some of these tips helpful or at least interesting. If you would like to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. If you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, back in Stormblood and probably before then too, mages had access to an ability called Mana Shift that transferred 20% of their MP to their target. This was particularly helpful for helping keep healers up, but in rare circumstances might even have been used on bards due to their buff Foe Requiem, which incidentally buffed magic damage specifically.